Hi, Zack. We are really excited to have you on our show today to talk about ZBiotics and this amazing new, very innovative probiotic that you created. And I remember when I first heard you on Dave Asprey's podcast, I was so intrigued because I'd honestly never heard of it before. And just the fact that you created something that could actually help people, with the negative effects that they feel after drinking alcohol, that I immediately reached out to you on Instagram, and here we are today. So thank you so much for joining us on our show.
Totally. Well, I'm excited to be here, and really excited about exactly what we're building and kind of inventing new things for the world of kind of health, as opposed to kind of just grabbing the same old stuff and putting it into new bottles. So I'm really excited to chat with you all about it.
Great. Well, before we kind of dive into what we are here to talk about, we would love for you to share, what is your one non-negotiable to start each day?
I think it's probably my morning smoothie. It's really the thing that gets me going, makes me feel healthy, makes me feel like I got started off on the right foot. I think that's kind of like a really necessary beginning of the day. Without that, I think my day just gets off on the wrong foot.
Okay, so I have to ask you what's in your smoothie, because Marnie and I also do a smoothie pretty much every single day.
And so awesome. Well, good. Yeah. I'd like to hear what's in yours then too. Mine is it's kale and then berries, and then so usually blueberries or strawberries, and then I put in chia and flax, and then either water or soy milk, depending on what I have available, and then that's usually it.
Awesome.
Okay.
I love hearing about different smoothies.
Chia and flax, right, and then the soy milk. Yeah, right, yeah. Right. Soy milk is. So I used to put in a protein powder. Honestly, I ran out and I didn't miss it, and so but I do think that occasionally I'll put in some Greek yogurt. I do try to get like 10 to 15 grams of protein in the morning, plus the seeds, because that's not complete protein. So hit or miss on the protein, I guess. But yeah.
So, Zack, I know that, you've had quite a journey, and we'd love to hear how you ended up genetically engineering pre-alcohol probiotics. Like, that's such a mouthful.
We do need to get better at explaining that, I think, in like a tighter thing. But I guess my journey. So I used to, after I graduated from college, I was sort of bouncing around different jobs, not sure what I wanted to do. And I ended up first working in a chemistry lab, and then environmental chemistry. But I was really interested in human health and public health. And so through a friend, I was able to get a job as a research technician at an HIV lab, studying HIV. And I just really love that. It really scratched the itch that I thought I wanted. It confirmed that I was interested in that. And so I decided to go back to school and get a PhD in microbiology. And so started to my PhD and thinking I was going to study HIV or potentially viral infection. But through, circumstances and fate and everything, I ended up just doing a rotation in a bacteriology lab and really falling in love with that. And so studying bacteria instead of viruses. And at first I was still very much interested in like the disease aspect of it and the idea of learning about that and preventing that. But as I got to know bacteria better throughout the course of my PhD, I actually realized that that's just a very small sliver of human interaction with bacteria. The vast majority of our interactions with bacteria are either neutral or positive, not negative. We obviously know the most about sort of the negative interactions because they're the most kind of urgent or important when they happen. But throughout your entire day, you're interacting with all these bacteria. They're doing all these incredible things for you. And the more I learned about that, the more I realized that was a very cool and exciting path and lever. And so that got me interested in sort of beneficial microbes and beneficial interactions and led me down the path of thinking about probiotics, right? As probiotics are generally considered to be, good bacteria that you can eat that somehow will benefit you in some way. But as I, looked into it more and researched it more, realizing that most of the probiotics that were on the market weren't really providing a lot of benefit for people in most cases. Like most of them are lactobacillus or bifidobacteria. Those are like the two most common kinds, although there are others. And that's not really neither of those bacteria are really part of a healthy adult microbiome. And there are like some studies that show that they can be beneficial to some people sometimes, but then there are other studies that show they don't do anything. And I think that both are true. That I think that the thing you could say about probiotics as they exist is that they can help some people sometimes, and but not always. And I think that's in part because you have this huge community in your gut of bacteria, and they live in there. And it's called the microbiome, and this big community, a network of bacteria is doing all of these things, and they're living in this kind of like ecosystem in your gut, and they're also interacting with your cells and your biology too. And that ecosystem is constantly changing. And so your microbiome and mine are totally different. And your microbiome today and your microbiome, in 3 months is also going to be very different. And so the idea that like this, this commercially produced like lactobacillus or something is going to get in there into everybody's different community and uniformly have like a benefit is, not realistic. And indeed, it's not what we see, right? And so it makes sense that some scientific studies show a benefit in some people and then not others. It's probably because the differences in their microbiome and their biology and their makeup. And so to me, that felt like an opportunity, right? Like we had this thing, this potential, this very cool tool, right? This whole microbial community, and you have these good bacteria, and they can do all these great things for you. And like, how could we then make that more specific or more directed? And rather than sort of just right now, we sort of just take things essentially fundamentally out of the ground and give them to you and say, I hope this helps you in some way. But instead of doing that, like taking that out of the ground and then like refining that into a very specific tool. So like one of the analogies I use is like, imagine like going into a mine and like pulling out like a hunk of like iron ore out of the mountain, and then just like handing and like, getting a bunch of these and just handing them out to people and saying like, hey, you can use this as a tool for whatever you might want. Like maybe it'll pound in a nail or screw in a screw. I don't really know, but there you go. Like go for it. And this will universally help you. And it probably wouldn't, right? But then we could take that hunk of iron ore and refine it down and shape it into a hammer and say that this is a very specific thing, performs a very specific function that could be beneficial to you. It's just like hammering in nails. And so that's kind of what I saw as the opportunity, was take these bacteria and then refine them in some way that made them do a very specific function that would be uniform for everybody who used them. And so that was kind of like the fundamental idea behind ZBiotics.
Wow.
So how did you, and you did such a great way of explaining.
We could zoom in on that. I apologize. I know it's a lot of things.
Well, I feel like we could talk just about probiotics because, I think a couple of years ago, Marnie and I would have said, everyone needs a probiotic. And now our views are shifting around that as well. And there's a lot of different research. And so I love that you touched on that. I mean, I guess before we even get into like the actual product here, can we just dive in and talk a little bit about the gut microbiome? Because it sounds like that was really where you became passionate about during your PhD. And it's really at the heart of why you started ZBiotics. So can you talk high level a little bit more about the microbiome? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe even also touching on like, what do we know about the microbiome and behaviors and hormones and our body's like overall performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the sheer vastness of the microbiome, I think is a good place to start, right? That like you have roughly like about, I guess like 30 trillion human cells in your body. And you have about 38 trillion bacterial cells in your body. So even though by size, we're obviously more human cells, because bacterial cells are smaller than human cells, but like by number, we're actually more bacteria than human, which is pretty cool to think about. And so really like when I think a more accurate way, when we think about like who I am and like what I am, it's like we think of ourselves as this like human kind of like navigating through the world, this like single entity. But what we're really probably more accurately describes us is like a walking ecosystem. Like if you picture a pond and it's got all these different animals living in it, right? And they all interact with each other. That's more like what we are and what most animals are, is sort of like a moving ecosystem. And so we're putting food in and then the ecosystem is benefiting from that. And so the microbiome is incredible. And in many ways, it has shaped the way we look. And the way we function is to fundamentally benefit itself. And so in many ways, like, one of the experiments I talk about that I think is a really cool explanation of what I mean here is like, so stepping away, but I promise I'll bring it back around. You have like, they can do these experiments in mice that are genetically identical, right? So two mice that are, for all intents and purposes, identical twins, totally genetically the same. All their cells are the same. And they can have mice and they can make mice that have no bacteria and no microbiome, no bacteria at all. They're called germ-free. They're completely sterile. And then what they can do is, what's really interesting is then you can do these experiments where you transfer in different microbiomes into the mice, right? And so you can take the microbiome from a mouse that is so again, genetically identical mice, but have microbiomes. And so one is a lean mouse, and then one's like an obese mouse. And then you can take the microbiome from the lean mouse or the obese mouse and transfer it into its genetically identical twin that is germ-free. And then that mouse its body type will change, right? So if it gets the microbiome, so just the bacteria from an obese mouse, it will start to eat more, and it will get overweight. And so nothing about its brain or its cells or anything or its decision-making changed, right? It was the same mouse. All it changed was the bacteria that were in the mouse. And so the bacteria were basically telling the mouse to eat more. And then it was absorbing more of the nutrients from its food. It was getting fatter. So I joke that if you were to walk into a restaurant and cognitively that you should order the salad, but you end up ordering the burger when the waiter comes over, who was making that decision? Were you making that decision, or the bacteria in your gut making that decision, right? I mean, because they genuinely can affect the way you behave. And so we think of ourselves as this ecosystem, right? And even just the way we're structured and our digestive system and everything, and the way that our digestive system is attached to our brain, all of that has been shaped over, millions and years of evolution. With co-evolving with these bacteria that live in us. So they really are core and central to who we are and how we function. Even the language that our brain uses to communicate to itself, right? With these neurotransmitters, these chemicals that pass from one cell to another, and that's how we pass signals through our nervous system. Those chemicals were actually invented. Many of them were invented by bacteria. And we actually took the genes that encoded for those chemicals wholesale from a bacteria and put them into our cells. And then now we use those. So we essentially speak the same chemical language as bacteria in many ways. And they communicate with us directly. They secrete chemicals into our bloodstream that go we have a direct line of communication, nervous system communication between our gut and our brain. And a lot of people have probably heard about the gut-brain axis, which is this communication between our gut and our brain, which makes sense, right? We aren't alive if we don't eat. So it makes sense that the brain and the gut have a very important communication line. And the bacteria can really plug into that line of communication. They can plug into that sort of telephone line going between those two and give their own signals and say yes, we want more carbs or whatever, or there's a stressful situation. We detect a stressful situation. You should throw up. And so there's all kinds of interesting things that happen there. So your cells or the bacteria in your microbiome are incredibly important to your overall biology. And another way to put this is, so in addition to us having as many bacterial cells as human cells, the difference being that all of our human cells express the same genes, right? So they have the same genes, right? So there's about 20,000 genes encoded in your DNA, more or less. It changes all the time in terms of what science says is how many we have, but let's just call it about 20,000. And so each gene encodes for a protein that executes some function to keep you alive, right? And so all of your cells have the same kind of repertoire of about 20,000 genes, right? And you have all these bacteria, you have the same number of bacteria as human cells, but all those bacteria have different genes and a different repertoire of proteins that they can do. And so actually we have, I think it's 1,000-fold more bacterial genes in our body than human genes. So there are 1,000 more functions that the bacteria are performing on your behalf than you are. So they're clearly very important to our diet and our metabolism and our brain development and our immune system and our ability to fight infectious disease, our ability to not become overinflamed and have autoimmunity, but suppress overinflammation. All these things are core, and the microbiome is core and central to it. Affects our skin health, everything. It's really central to everything we do, and it makes sense kind of in the context of that evolutionary history we have with them.
Well, and I think it's you can't. We're hearing about it every single day, right?
Right.
First, it was just the probiotics and the microbiome, and then it was the gut-brain connection, and now it's the skin microbiome.
Right.
And
yeah.
It's kind of, I feel like I've been watching this evolve over the last 10 years, and it's so interesting. And I feel like we haven't really scratched the surface on what we even know about the microbiomes in our bodies. I was just going to say, I love how you said we're walking ecosystems. I've never really heard humans described that way. And it's so true. And also that we're more bacteria than we are human. That's kind of amazing, right?
It's crazy. I mean, it's who's serving who? We think of ourselves as humans,
right.
There are more of them with more genes, and they've been around a lot longer. They kind of know the world better than we do. So it's pretty amazing.
It makes me think of sci-fi movies, but
yeah, totally.
And also, people will talk about their genetic makeup and how, I'm genetically predisposed to heart disease or cancer or diabetes or what have you. And it does, a lot of people will say, well, you can kind of outdo your genes. You can change your lifestyle and make different changes. And that sort of goes along the lines. That's what I'm starting to think about when you were talking. If, there is more bacteria than, just our regular human cells. So yeah, this is all really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a lever. I think that's why there's been so much excitement lately, right? You asked people 20 years ago, I don't think anybody would have even heard of any normal, regular person would have ever heard of the microbiome. It was sort of like this niche of academia that we were only first starting to understand ourselves. It really wasn't appreciated until recently. And now I think there's all this excitement because of that exact idea, right? That it's this very important and central, essentially organ system of the body. It's equivalent to discovering that we had another liver or something, this other organ of the body that we didn't ever even talk about before that is impacts everything and is changeable, right? We can affect that in certain ways through our diet and our behaviors and not totally. And I think that we're also learning that it's not as plastic as we would like it to be. There is some amount of sort of microbiome memory. And so you have this sort of core structure that is difficult to change. It takes a lot of effort to work against, but there is a lot of movement or motion there that isn't the same for other parts of your, other systems of your body. So I think that's what's so exciting is that we all of a sudden have some element of control where we felt like we didn't before.
Well, and it makes me think about, personalized medicine and biohacking and all the things that are coming out, where you can tailor this test to you and you can do, this to your sleep and this to your diet and all these different things. And I just feel like the more we unlock about the microbiomes in our body, the more we can biohack for longevity. And I think maybe not for longevity, but I think what your product is doing is one of those biohacking kind of things when it comes to alcohol and drinking, right? So yeah. We'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, I would argue that to some extent, indirectly, it is about longevity healthy years and getting the most out of your longevity is only good if you're getting a lot out of that time, right? Right. It doesn't matter if that time sucks. I think that, what we're building is exactly that, right? That and I think you bring up a really good point, Marnie, which is that there's all this excitement about things that we could do, but we're really just scratching the surface, right? And the more we learn, the more levers we have to pull. And, I think there is a future in which once we've discovered more, we'll be able to have more of an impact on that. And so then looking at where we are in our understanding of the microbiome now, where we are from a practical standpoint, what can we actually do about what we know? I think that we're still really at the beginning stages and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so that's kind of, was the backdrop for ZBiotics was that what were we going to build knowing what we know and knowing what we can do and what we can't currently do. And so the idea here was that this microbiome is really complex. It's this crazy network of, the whole world's population or way more than that of bacteria, right? In everybody's gut, and it's constantly changing and moving and everything. So what are the things we could do? And so one of the things we realized early on was we're not going to be able to reliably affect your microbiome, right? In a way that will be helpful to you and me and to somebody else, right? And so instead, we could just leverage the fact that bacteria express all of these genes and perform all of these useful functions for you. And we could just program a bacteria to perform one very specific function in addition to everything else it already does. Just give it that one extra thing and make sure that simple function is somehow beneficial to everybody. So it's not going to try and affect the whole community. It's just going to walk in there with a hammer in its hand. It's going to say I'm going to pound in all the loose nails, and that's what it's going to do in addition to everything else that's already going on there. And it's completely agnostic to what your microbiome looks like or what your biology is. It just walks in and it does this one task. And so that's very simple idea, right? This big complex microbiome and it's affecting all your biology. So we're taking a baby step here, just one little thing that could be better. And so that one little thing with our first product is a probiotic that's engineered to break down a toxic metabolic byproduct of alcohol. So when you drink alcohol, your body converts alcohol from alcohol into something else called acetaldehyde, which is very toxic. And then it converts that acetaldehyde into something that's non-toxic, which is acetate. Acetate is essentially vinegar. And non-toxic, actually, the short-chain fatty acid can be beneficial. But that intermediate is just a necessary kind of step on the way to getting it to be detoxified. Alcohol is toxic, and then this acetaldehyde is even more toxic, but then we get to acetate. And so what happens is that a small amount of most of the alcohol you drink is absorbed into your bloodstream, and it circulates throughout your body and has the effects that alcohol has. That's why people drink it, right? And then it makes its way to your liver, and your liver breaks down in both of those steps, from alcohol to acetaldehyde and acetaldehyde to acetate. And it does both of them very effectively and very efficiently. And so once the alcohol is in the liver can take care of it and detoxify it. And from acetate, all kinds of things happen. But in terms of the story about toxicity, it's kind of that's the end of the chain. So the story is a little bit different in your gut. I think we always think about like, how is alcohol broken down? Everybody knows, the liver is important for alcohol. And that's true. Most of the alcohol is broken down that way, but a very small amount of the alcohol you drink is actually metabolized directly in your gut before it's absorbed out into the bloodstream, before it basically gets into your body. And that's done in large part by your microbiome, by the bacteria that live in your gut. Some of the alcohol before it's absorbed is broken down from, and alcohol is obviously like sterilizing, right? It's bad for bacteria. And so they have genes that can break the alcohol down into acetaldehyde, but it's less common for them to break that acetaldehyde down into acetate. And so what happens is that that small amount of alcohol is being converted into this very toxic intermediate acetaldehyde. And that's happening slowly all night long while you're drinking. And so even though it's a very minor source of alcohol metabolism, it ends up being the major source of this very toxic molecule, acetaldehyde. So you actually get this huge accumulation of acetaldehyde in your gut. Like acetaldehyde in the gut is 10 times higher than it is in the bloodstream. And so because liver is very good at it, right? And so but then what happens is this acetaldehyde accumulates in the gut, and then it slowly leaks out in the bloodstream, slowly all night long, circulates throughout your body, the same way alcohol does, wreaks havoc, and then it makes its way to the liver where it's quickly broken down. And so basically you have this just like slow release of this toxin all night when you're drinking. So we thought, why don't we just move that function, the liver breaking down acetaldehyde and acetate, into the gut? And so we took a probiotic bacteria that you eat every day and just gave it that one extra function. So it, instead of walking around with a hammer pounding in loose nails, it walks around with sort of, I don't know what the analogy would be, but it walks around and basically finds acetaldehyde and gets rid of it, like with a mop, and it sort of mops up those little spots, before they get absorbed in the bloodstream.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Can we back up for 1 second?
Yeah, totally.
I don't even know if I'm going to pronounce this right, but acetaldehyde?
Yeah, acetaldehyde. Yeah.
Acetaldehyde.
Yeah.
Okay. So for someone who drinks daily, or let's say even like an alcoholic, are they accumulating large amounts of acetaldehyde in their gut that's like building up over time?
Oh, no.
Or
so
is it something that's breaking down every time you're drinking?
Every time you're drinking. So it doesn't build up. Doesn't like bioaccumulate like a metal or something like that. So it's a very reactive molecule, which is why it's so toxic. So it can bind to like proteins and DNA, and it's very soluble, so it can pass through cell membrane. So it basically has like full unfettered access to your body, and every nook and cranny of your body. And when it gets in there, it reacts with things, and so it does all this chemistry that you don't want it to do. And so that's really, but all that happens relatively quickly. So each molecule of acetaldehyde that's being formed is sort of like it reacts quickly. And so then you're only making acetaldehyde while you're drinking. And when you stop drinking, it's, you don't really make any more. And then like basically over the next couple of hours, that acetaldehyde is going to have whatever effects it's going to have. And then you're dealing with the downstream consequences of those effects for longer than that, right? Like basically imagine just like, this bull in a china shop, just kind of like messing up your cells. And then all the downstream, your body having to deal with all of that, like damage basically. And so you deal with like inflammation and all these other things for the next however many hours, we or maybe sometimes even a day or two kind of after. It's like, but all that is you dealing with the consequences of the outside, not the outside directly anymore.
Wow. So is there long-term implications for someone who, has been drinking since in their teenage years? I know it doesn't stay, the acetaldehyde's not staying in your gut, But it just seems to me, and maybe that's why like people in their 40s and 50s are like, oh, I used to be able to go out and drink and feel better the next day and go run a race. And now I can barely get out of bed. So it has to be some long-term implications.
Well, so that what you're describing there is actually less like the alcohol wearing you down over time, and more that like your body just gets worse at handling it, right? Like when you're young, you know, in your college and early 20s, right? Like your body is just much better at dealing with damage and like, you know, like you heal faster. And so as you get into your 40s and 50s, it's more that like, you know, your body is just generally not as good. Like, right. Like the same thing as you were like, you know, break your ankle, you're going to heal faster when you're a kid than you are when you're an adult. And so it's more that you're dealing with.
Okay. So basically you created this probiotic that is breaking down this toxic byproduct. Is that correct?
Right. Exactly. It's helping your body deal with this acetaldehyde. Specifically the gut-derived acetaldehyde. Yeah.
And it's like a one-time thing.
Yes. Right. Okay. Exactly. It's like, I'll say at this stage in our capabilities as scientists, it is impossible for you to reliably have a bacteria seed the gut of everybody. We don't have the ability to do that now. And I would argue it's a good thing, right? Like part of the deal with the microbiome is it's constantly changing. So if we're able to like sort of force something in there, that would sort of disrupt the natural kind of like plasticity of the microbiome. And so this is just sort of passing through. So we picked a bacteria that you already eat every day of your life. It's called Bacillus subtilis. It's a safe soil microbe. It's on the surface of fresh fruits and vegetables. It's everywhere. You're constantly ingesting it. And so and part of its natural life cycle is that it just passes through the gut. It's kind of floats down the river, enjoys the nutrients that are available there, and then you pass it out the other side. And so we just said that, okay, well, while you're floating down the river, like also do this one extra function of kind of mopping up the acetaldehyde.
And you are genetically modifying this, correct?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we took a bacteria you already eat every day, and then we engineered it. We used genetic engineering to have it perform this extra function. So that wouldn't have happened. Yeah, it didn't do that on its own. We had to engineer to do that. So yes, the product is a GMO, and I think this is like our bigger mission, which is around the idea that like we can genetically engineer things to do things that are good, that people want, that are beneficial. And so it's a tool, and you can genetically engineer things that are unsavory or have bad implications, and then you can genetically engineer things that are good. And I can, if we want to get into it, I'm more than happy to describe how we genetically engineer something, because I think that there's maybe a lot of like misunderstanding about that and what genetic engineering really is. And
I think it would be helpful because I think our listeners have just heard no GMO, and we're looking for the like non-GMO label.
Right.
When it comes to food. So, maybe even just like the difference between what you've created and like the alleged negative consequences from eating a bunch of non-GMO crops all day.
And even taking it a step further, I guess for me, my concern is, okay, you're introducing this genetically engineered bacteria into my body.
Right.
That we don't really know much about, right? Because it's new. So
I would
maybe touch on that.
that we actually know a lot about it. So it's an important thing, right? That like, I think that GMOs have gotten a lot of bad press because of bad use cases enabled by the technology. But fundamentally genetic engineering. So genetic engineering is sort of like, I'll use as like the term for the technology that is used to make GMOs, which are like so GMO stands for genetically modified organism. So an organism is like a bacteria is an organism, or your human body is an organism, right? So we make a genetically modified bacteria using genetic engineering. And so genetic engineering is this tool, and it can be used to make all kinds of products. And so I think that the technology has been sort of conflated with some of the unsavory use cases that some people perceive about some GMOs that are out there. And then what's happened is that narrative is kind of spun out to this idea that like GMOs inherently, by the very fact that they're modified, are in some way unsafe. But in reality, it's the application that the genetic modification was put to that could be potentially unsafe, right? So if you're making, for instance, Roundup Ready corn, right? Like now this corn is able to tolerate more pesticide usage. And so people are afraid about the pesticide, and they're afraid about the amount of usage in the fields, right? And all those things are things that are enabled by the fact that it was genetically engineered. But the fact that the sequence of DNA in the corn was changed did not affect its safety in any way. And that's well established, and I think any scientist would agree on that. It's a question about whether or not the practices that were enabled by it make it less safe. And there's lots of literature out there in both directions. And so stepping aside from that, like just the idea though, that like the technology itself is not what creates the lack of safety. It's how that the practices that it enables may or may not, right? And that's not to say that you couldn't genetically engineer something that was unsafe. Of course you can, right? Like the idea is that we can move any new trait into a bacteria. So you can imagine if I took a bacteria and then moved in a trait for, something that we already know to be toxic or unsafe, then obviously then I've now created something unsafe, but that would necessitate me moving something unsafe into it. The fact that I've genetically engineered it in itself did not make it unsafe. And so this is kind of one of the analogies I use is sort of like the idea that like you may like a person may be anti-guns and they think that guns are unsafe and that we shouldn't have them, right? And obviously there's a big debate about that. I think that anybody who would argue that guns are unsafe wouldn't advocate that the technology used to make guns, so metallurgy, is unsafe, that we should be anti-metallurgy because we're anti-guns, right? Because you recognize that metallurgy can also be used to make a spoon, which is a very safe product that has nothing to do with guns other than the fact that they were made with the same technology. And, the same thing with like a combustion engine, right? Like we drive cars, even though we know that there's some like inherent risk in that technology, like an engine could explode or something, right? But like we recognize that there are benefits to the technology, and I think that in our food we consider that a little bit more personal, and we've only seen these sort of like this very negative narrative about like very bad business practices, and that's sort of being conflated with the technology itself. But the technology is really like anything else, is just something that we can do now that we couldn't do before, and so I think explaining, for instance, how we do it, I think will shine some light on this. It's not like, I think a lot of people think of it as sort of like unnatural, that like we're like manipulating its DNA. And I mean, in reality, what we're doing is leveraging natural bacteria and humans and all living things are constantly, their DNA is constantly changing. And there are many processes which happen. So when your cell replicates, the cellular machinery that replicates it makes mistakes. And then there's other functions in your cell that go in and change the DNA to fix that mistake. And so that's a normal, like your DNA is constantly changing. It's a normal function. And bacteria have been doing this way longer than we have. So bacteria is 3 billion years old, and humans are, in the last 100 million or so, so much, much, much younger. And so bacteria have been changing their DNA forever. And so one of the things that we use is a mechanism for our mechanism for genetic engineering is called homologous recombination. And so not important to know the term, but basically bacteria have been doing homologous recombination for a long time. And it's basically a form of bacterial mating. And so what happens is that bacteria swim around in their pond, and if there's a piece of DNA floating in that pond, they have a process of taking that DNA, that piece of DNA into their cell, and then comparing it to the sequence of DNA they have. And if it's reasonably similar, so if they find a homology or a similarity, they basically will swap out that random piece of DNA they found in the environment for the piece of DNA in their genome, and then so incorporate that. And the theory on that is that bacteria are just playing a numbers game, right? There are billions and billions of bacteria, and in this pond or whatever. And so if I take something up and it hurts me in some way, then I'll just die. But that's okay because there's many other bacteria around. But if in some way it helps me, then I will now replicate a bunch and sort of spread that new helpful trait out. And so it's its normal way of editing its own DNA, and it has become super efficient and precise at doing that. And so we basically leverage the same thing. We basically just do bacterial gene editing that bacteria already do. It's a natural process. We just now understand it. And so now we can do it too. And so with our first product, what we've done is we basically take a piece of DNA that encodes for a gene that, or encodes for, I say, a protein that can break down acetaldehyde, right? So we have this protein that can break down this toxic byproduct, and this protein exists. And so for us, it matters what you move in, right? So we had to be very specific about what we wanted to grab. And so this gene that encodes for this protein is present in 70% of all life on the planet. It's very common. Your own cells, right? Your liver cells make this gene. Many bacteria make this gene. In fact, even bacteria in your gut make this gene. They just don't make it enough at the right time. So we take this gene that we know to be safe, that we know your body's exposed to all the time. And we take it and we basically like mix our bacteria in a test tube, like in a small pond with this piece of DNA. And then the bacteria just naturally take up that DNA and incorporate it into their genome at some small percentage. And then we're able to basically grow out the ones that do. And then that's our product, right? So that's genetic engineering. It's very like the bacteria do all the work. We're literally just now know that we can mix them together and that will happen. And it'll happen super precisely. And then what I would argue is even better about genetic engineering is that we know everything that happened down to the single base pair. So for instance, like in the past, like what we've normally done in terms of genetic engineering has been crossbreeding, right? Like, so you'll take a plant with red flowers and a plant with white flowers and you cross them together and you need a plant with pink flowers and that's what you want. But what happened there is basically that like you wanted to transfer a trait, like a function from the red flower plant to the white flower plant to give it to produce some of this red pigment, right? And so in doing that, you just mash their whole genomes together and all kinds of things happened. And you have no idea all the things that happened there, except for that at the end, you had pink flowers. So all kinds of other things changed. And so obviously you can imagine that bad things could happen too. And indeed they do, or undesirable things could happen. And indeed they do all the time. We see that with crossbreeding a lot. Well, a lot's a relative term. I mean, like it's not infrequent. It happens, right? And so what the difference is that we can be super precise. We can know, we say that only this single gene will change and nothing else about it will change. And then we can go in and we can sequence the whole genome. So we can basically read the whole code of instructions and make sure that no other unintended changes happen. So we have a lot more precision. So basically, if you start with a safe bug and we only change one gene in that bug to have that one single function, then we can say that the bug is safe still, except for this function. And we have to make sure that that function is safe as well. So it gives us a very good focus on proving that something is safe. Whereas if we were to just mash two bugs together, we'd have to start from scratch. We couldn't say that anything was safe about it because we have no idea what has changed. And so with genetic engineering, we can actually be a lot more precise and we can focus our efforts on the safety and the inherent risks much more in a much more guided way. So in a lot of ways, genetic engineering is actually, and that makes sense, right? It's a modern technology with more precision. So obviously, like we have more control and it can be safer than a more rudimentary and crude version of that technology, which is like crossbreeding.
Wow. Wow.
You gave some really cool explanations and like really like practical and easy to understand examples and analogies, which I think is really helpful for all of our listeners out there. And like, I was thinking the same thing, like you're just being really precise with what you're doing. And I'm just thinking down the road, I feel like we're on the cusp of more precision medicine and all the things we talked about kind of earlier on. And so I'll be excited for, I don't know, what's to come down the road, both for ZBiotics and other companies as well that are getting into this space, that are using genetically modified organisms for the benefit of humans and health. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about the benefits, right? Like what do people, how do you take this? How often do you have to take it?
Right here.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And what, even like, does it impact how intoxicated you get, right?
Right. Yeah. So great.
And
question.
even it says drink before drinking.
Right.
Proudly GMO.
Proudly GMO, right? Like the idea that,
I love that.
we can build something with genetic engineering that creates a real benefit, right? And we shouldn't be ashamed or try and I think that's one of the big issues, right? With sort of the anti-GMO movement, I think initially was a lot about transparency, right? The fact that this was in our food and nobody was telling us, right? It was being hidden from us. And so if it's being hidden, then it must be bad or dangerous. Like why would you hide it? And I think that was a huge misstep by the industry. And I would also argue that some of the use cases that it was applied to were also like unsavory and missteps by the industry. And so unfortunately what happened there was that a technology that is just fundamentally an advancement in our ability to do things better got sort of conflated with a lot of this like a lot of these really bad practices. And so our mission is around elevating the conversation. I'm certainly not going to stand here and say that all GMOs are good or that genetic engineering is inherently, without a doubt, like never unsafe. Like that's not true, right? That's all or nothing statements are not true. When we talk about the art of living well, it's all about no, there's no like blanket statements, right? Like, everything is nuanced, and unfortunately, people don't always like nuance. They want yes or no answers. But the truth is that like any technology, it's a technology and it can be used to make good things and bad things. It can be used safely and unsafely. And we have to be obsessed with how it's being used safely and make sure that it's being used for good things. So that's part of what we set out to do, is to show that like we can use genetic engineering in a way that is beneficial, in ways that people want, and be very transparent about the fact that we use genetic engineering to create that benefit, and be transparent about what we do, that we do it responsibly and that we do it safely. So we're putting together a lot of information around that and trying to structure regulation to make sure that everything is like very clear. There's very clear guardrails and all that kind of stuff. So,
and before you even answer Stephanie's question, I'm curious about if you're mission or your idea when you set out to do this? Was it to cure the hangover? Was it to just make sure the bacteria in the gut aren't getting too messed up? Like, were you really narrowing in on this from a scientific perspective, or were you like, hey, I like to go out and drink and I feel like crap the next day, and I want to engineer something where I can feel better the next day?
Yeah,
like,
right. What was the motive?
What was your motive? I'm just very curious.
No, it's a really good question. I mean, and I'll say the short answer is no. I did not go out there to make everybody's day after drinking better. That wasn't why ZBiotics got started. The goal was really that, I saw this opportunity with bacteria, like I said before, about this opportunity that we could engineer bacteria to have to perform some useful function. And that was exciting to me. I was seeing that this biotechnology was being used in the drug industry to cure diseases, but it was a long way down the road. And I thought, and my personal opinion was that we were starting with too much complexity. And I thought that we could do something simpler. And I also thought that that as often is the case with new technologies, they usually start in the most extreme kind of use cases. And then finally, 20, 30 years later, they sort of trickle down. And then, the average healthy user gets to use them. But like, there's no reason for that, right? And to be very clear, I'm grateful that people are applying this technology to really, very serious diseases. And I think that it's going to have a huge impact on the way humanity can function and fight disease. But I also think that it can help healthy people be healthier. And so I saw an opportunity to do something simpler, like with very simple biochemical reactions, a single enzyme or single protein kind of executing one single function, totally agnostic to the microbiome, and have a real impact on the way people felt then, in their healthy lives. And I was really excited by the idea of bringing science, and putting it into people's hands, in a way that they could choose. That's the other thing, right? Like, we genetically engineer bacteria to make human insulin, and we've been doing that for the last 40 years. And so if you're diabetic, you take the product of a GMO every day and it saves your life. And nobody has a problem with GMOs in that scenario, but they're also not choosing the GMO. They have to take that or else they'll die. And so nobody's going to die, although it may feel like it, from the next day effects of drinking. So you have an opportunity to choose. And I thought that was really important, especially on our mission. It really boiled my blood to walk through the grocery store and see the non-GMO butterfly on everything, on products that have no business even weighing in on the conversation. So for instance, if you see like a bag of wheat flour and it says it has a non-GMO butterfly on it, there is no genetically engineered wheat. It doesn't exist. So all wheat flour is non-GMO. And yet these brands are throwing this technology under the bus that they have nothing to do with in order to like sell the products. And so they're really like, it's a very short-sighted thing that really damages humanity, right? Like our ability to benefit from this technology is being hurt by the fact that people's perceptions are constantly being, it's all this negative kind of publicity around GMOs from people who have no stake in the game at all. And it's too bad. It's just trend, right? Of this idea that GMOs, are bad and unnatural and dangerous. And so like just sort of fanning the flames of fear for people and spreading all this misinformation it's a disaster, quite frankly. And so I wanted to do something about that. And so I originally, as a scientist, was not as plugged into people like the general population's desires as I probably needed to be. So I had some objectively cool scientific ideas of how we could apply this genetically engineered probiotic that were really bad commercial ideas. And so like I sort of pitched those and kind of got a lot of glazed over eyes and stuff. And then, but I used to be like, but we can do anything, like, any biological function on the planet. There's so many things we could, I list like, 10 other things that, so like we could even make you feel better the day after drinking, and people's eyes would like light up. They'd be like, whoa, tell me about that one. And I'd be like, that was like a joke at the end, but people really seemed to like, and I realized that even if people thought of it as kind of a joke, they understood it. And it was a very clear benefit that like, you know how it feels. And I also like that, right? If I made a product that helped with that, people could actually feel the benefit, right? You don't have to take my word for it. Like, trust me, this is helping you. It's like you take the product, and if you feel better the next day, then you can trust your own experience, right? Like you can go look at data on our website or whatever, but at the end of the day, like, do you actually feel the benefit? And I thought, if I'm going to launch the world's first ever genetically engineered probiotic, right? And I'm going to build this new category and try and sort of elevate this conversation around genetic engineering, I should really make sure that people believe the product's actually doing something. And I thought that this is a great place to start. It's a problem that people understand. It's a normal thing that healthy people deal with. And it's something that like they can evaluate for themselves. So that's why I started there. It's not core to them. It wasn't our mission, to kind of fix everybody's next day. But but it is something that I think it's a great place to start. It's a great place to kind of introduce what we do. So yeah,
and you're right. It's consumable. Yeah, it's consumable, right. And you notice it immediately. I mean, the next day, right? You're going to notice it. So it's not like you're taking it and, you hope in 2 months that supplement you're taking actually works. Right. Or that maybe standard off the shelf probiotic, it may help you, with digestion. Right. Who knows? So,
and how do you even evaluate that? Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So
and how you feel is like the best way to evaluate.
Right. Exactly. So we're building, this technology is there's a lot of things we can do with it. And so we're building more products, and we have a pipeline of things. And our goal is to have, dozens of products that, help you in all these different aspects of your life. And it's for people who are health conscious and focused on their well-being and their longevity and their ability to function at the highest level that they can. And, this is not for people who want to get out of jail free card. This is for people who are investing in their health and consider themselves responsible, healthy people. And I think that's a really important distinction. Because at the end of the day, the downside of the first product is it's sort of like, it could be perceived as sort of this like vice product, right? But that's not at all what it was built for. And it doesn't work that way either, right? If you go out and to Vegas and, go crazy, the product only breaks down gut-derived acetaldehyde. The next day misery you feel, there are many things that contribute to that. It's a cacophony of sort of interactions. Alcohol itself causes poor sleep. It binds receptors in your brain and affects like your, the hormone levels and hormone balances around like your, the way you deal with food and hunger and all these different, so there's all kinds of things that are happening to the alcohol itself, right? And then acetaldehyde is just, contributes to some of the worst misery, but like it's only part of it, right? So you still have to drink responsibly. You have to be the kind of person that is trying to do their best, right? And then ZBiotics is like one more tool in the toolbox for that person who's investing in their health. And so all the products we're building are that same kind of blueprint, right? Like for people who are already investing in their health, what's something we could give them that didn't exist before that allows them to invest even better in their health? And so that's kind of how we think about it.
I love that you're creating more products because this idea is fantastic. And I'm wondering with the pre-alcohol drink, would you say there's like a sweet spot? You mentioned if someone's going to Vegas and like going crazy, they're still going to feel crappy. But, if someone's just having one drink and maybe they're relatively healthy and, aren't a huge drinker to begin with, they may feel fine the next day anyway. So is there kind of like the sweet spot? It's probably very specific to the person, I'm guessing.
Yeah. It's very, exactly. So, everybody's, we've all had this experience, right? Where like you go out with your friends and you all end up drinking the same amount, and some people feel better than others the next day regardless, right? And everybody's experience of that next day misery is different too. Like some people feel nauseous, some people feel tired, whatever. And so all that's due to the fact that your body is responding differently to the various different things that are causing damage between the alcohol and the acetaldehyde. So to some extent, there is a bit of individuality to it. That being said, it is, the product was designed to help regardless of the situation, right? So like one drink or 10 drinks, you may, depending on, the more you drink, the more you're dealing with the effects of alcohol itself, you may still feel something that likely feel better with ZBiotics than without it, even in that the sort of like that extreme sort of Vegas scenario. And obviously like that for most people is usually their kind of introduction to the product is like, hey, I'm going on a trip, I'm going to a wedding, I'm going to a bachelor party, something where they know it's going to be outside of their normal range. And ZBiotics is definitely, that's the primary use case. I think that's what people like it for. But then you experience that and you're like, wow, I feel a lot better. And then what we see from our customers is they start just taking it more and more. And now they're like, look, if I know I have more than one drink, I'm never going to drink without it. Like, because you just don't want to take the risk, right? Like, we've all had that night where we've had like 2 or 3 and still felt like crap the next day. And so, that's, I envision, I think that like the best use case is to take it like no matter what, because you never know what a night's going to turn into, or you never know how that alcohol is going to affect you. But, I think for most people, realistically, they're probably going to, at least at the beginning, be taking it when they know it's going to be a bigger night than normal. But yeah, to answer your questions. Oh yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
No, I was just going to say, you were nice enough to send both Marnie and I product, and I have used it several times now, or 3 times. And last weekend, I had those nights that I knew were bigger nights, if you will, and I wasn't going to be at home drinking my organic wine. I will say, I woke up on Saturday morning. I'll just speak to the one instance. Both, I noticed a big impact, a big positive benefit from how I felt, but I had to wake up earlier than I thought because I signed up for a class and I it was an hour earlier. So I did not get a lot of sleep. And I'm really someone that needs my sleep. And I ended up at the class, a longer class than I want, that was way more intense, that I had never done this yoga class. And the guy was like on me the whole time because I was like the newbie, and he was like helping me and positioning me the entire time. So I couldn't like slack in the corner and just do, child's pose. And I was like, wow, my energy was, I was clear. My energy was great. I mean, even normally I would feel crappier even without drinking or only having like one glass if I didn't get a lot of sleep. So I was like, wow. I mean, it was for sure ZBiotics. I've never experienced that before, where I felt mentally and physically really good with not a lot of sleep and having drank the night before. And it was like a wine tasting. And then the same thing. And the next night I had like a birthday celebration, and I had to wake up early the next day and get on an airplane. And I felt great the whole day and like drive. And, I had to be like kind of on all day. So I don't know. Those are just my experiences I'll share. I'm a big fan, so I need to order more. And everyone's, like you said, everyone's different, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great story answer. It perfectly, I think, is perfect. It's exactly typifies kind of what we envision for the product, right? Like you had some drinks, and then you had your healthy routine the next day that you didn't want to have to miss, right? Like you were able to make that morning yoga class, right? And like, so when we talk about longevity, that's 2 or 3 more hours of healthy life that you lived, right? That you wouldn't have necessarily otherwise. And I think that that is really what the product is for. Is like, it's not so much about the drinking event, right? That would happen anyway, right? Like we're more about like all the things that, all those healthy routines you have that you layer in every day that you don't want to have to disrupt or miss out on because of that drinking event. And that's really what the product is meant to do, is to help you maintain those healthy routines and those healthy habits, make those commitments, and not feel miserable doing it. So that's kind of like core to what the product is for. Yeah.
Are there people that you would suggest don't use it, or any negative effects on certain people on their like microbiomes, or if they're having, gut health issues like leaky gut or, other health issues? Would you recommend certain people don't take this product?
I mean, I'd say that like, it's not meant to cure any diseases, right? And so it's not engineered to help you with leaky gut or IBD or any gut, even though it's a probiotic, it's really, the probiotic is incidental. It's right. That's really a chassis for this function of acetaldehyde breakdown. It is a live probiotic bacteria. And like any live probiotic, you should be, it's going to affect different people differently, depending on your microbiome and your own health situation. So if you have a disease, especially one of the gut, but really any disease, I mean, an autoimmune disease, anything like that, I mean, with any product, ours or otherwise, you should consult your doctor, right? Like we think of supplements as these things that like, oh, well, they're over the counter, so they must be safe. And that's not necessarily true for everybody, right? Like everybody's biology is different. So it's always important for you to like check with your health professional, especially if you're not like, if your health situation is different. So that's always true. And the case is, and, we do see like a small percentage of people, like, it doesn't agree with them. Like, right. Like we have, I know that if I eat like a high fiber, a high fiber bar or something like that, it gives me crazy stomach cramps. That doesn't agree with me in my biology. And this product is no different than that. Like any other probiotic or something. So I would always advise people to kind of, make sure that they're prepared for that, and it's a live probiotic. But generally speaking, no, I mean, it's, this is meant for healthy people to engage with the product, and so so a healthy person should be able to just fine.
And so I know you've done like studies, like what's your overall customer satisfaction, if you will? And
yeah. I mean, that's what makes me really happy as a scientist. Like say, when I started this out, it was the idea that I could put science in people's hands and like have people have like a real positive impact. And so we do see like an incredibly high customer satisfaction rate. We have 100% money back guarantee, which we always honor, no questions asked. And we have, a fraction of a percent of our sales request a refund. And then, I'd say that, in general, our customer satisfaction rating is around 94, 95%. So extremely high. So, more than 9 out of 10 people who would take this product will feel a benefit from it. Again, everybody's biology is different. Everybody's expectations and their experience the next morning are different. So, it's not it's not a drug. It's not an FDA approved drug. So we can't guarantee 100%. It's just not how biology works. But we see a very high customer satisfaction. And it's because we're having a very specific effect that people can really tell for themselves.
Can you give us a sneak peek of one of the other products you're developing?
Well, I'm keeping the powder dry on we're looking to launch product number 2 next year. It is totally different than our first product. It has nothing to do with drinking or anything like that. It is the same, but like I say, it follows the same
pattern,
through line, which is to help healthy people live healthier lives. And so the same customer, I think, is important. Is this, customer of the first product is a customer of the second, and customer of the second will be a customer of the first, I believe. But it's more focused on your gut and your microbiome. So really kind of tapping into my roots as a microbiologist. And so I think there's a lot of levers we can pull there that are really exciting. And so we built a product for that we're looking forward to announcing, hopefully in the next few months, and then launching in the next year. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome.
We'll be anxiously awaiting that. And, I think just thinking about a lot of our listeners and the overall demographic, a lot of them are women that are in their 40s and 50s, and they're like, I can't drink anymore. Like, I really like a good glass of wine. And I've even tried some organic wines, and that doesn't do it. So I think a lot of people are going to be really interested in this. And I don't know if you can just touch kind of briefly a little bit on, though, the hangover, because you have I think there's a blog post you guys have on your website of just about dehydration and the belief that alcohol causes dehydration. And I think, in general, we shouldn't just be pounding alcohol anyway. It's part of a good, healthy lifestyle. We should be sipping it, and when we should have water and food in between and all that good stuff. But if alcohol isn't the cause of dehydration, then what is the cause?
What's going on?
Of, in feeling so hungover the next day.
Right. No, it's good. This is like one of my big, one of the myths I love to bust. And so I'm happy you asked it. There's this belief that the way you feel the next day is due to dehydration. And that's, and it makes sense that we have this belief, right? You notice that when you drink, you end up peeing more often. And you've heard that alcohol sort of causes dehydration, and a little bit more scientifically, it inhibits the antidiuretic hormone, which means that you don't recycle water as well and you pass it out. And all of that is true. It's just not as true as it's sort of made out to be. There's sort of this pervasive myth. And that's because these companies want to sell you a product that's like a hydration aid, right? They give you vitamins, and it's feeding on this observation we have. But the fact is that when we scientifically test, there's actually no correlation between the way you feel the next day and dehydration. So the biochemical markers of dehydration are not there in significant amounts when you've been drinking a lot. And then so we know that you're not actually all that dehydrated. And we actually know that you don't actually pee very more when you drink than when you don't. So you actually pee one extra time. So this really cool experiment where they basically measured somebody's the amount that somebody peed when they gave them alcohol versus when they gave them the same volume of water or a non-alcoholic beverage. And basically what happens is when your blood alcohol initially spikes, you actually do pee one extra time. But then as you continue to drink, you end up not peeing more than somebody who's drinking the same amount of water. So all that peeing you notice you're doing at that bar, if you've had a few drinks, is really just because it'd be the same thing as if you sat around and drink 4 glasses of water or sitting there, is that you would have to pee. And so what's interesting is so you're at most deficit, 1 glass of water, right? And so that's certainly not enough to make you feel the way you feel. And I think you can do the thought experiment and convince yourself that the dehydration story doesn't really make a lot of sense. Other things that make you feel dehydrated, say eating salty food or exercising, those are things that we know dehydrate you. They don't feel anything like the way you feel the day after drinking, right? Those are totally different feelings, right? And in addition, the cure for dehydration, which is drinking water, does nothing for you when you feel miserable the next day, right? If it was as easy as pounding a couple glasses of water in the morning, then we wouldn't feel miserable all day, and we do, right? I think it's really obvious. I think if we really just think about it, people wanted something to hold on to, an easy observation, but actually, alcohol has dehydration has nothing to do with the way you feel the next day, and alcohol has very limited dehydrating ability. So what you're dealing with is actually the toxicity of alcohol itself and acetaldehyde. Both of them are causing different kind of things. So the body monkeying up various systems and causing inflammation. And I can go into all the biochemistry, but we probably don't need to. The important thing to know is that those two molecules are wreaking havoc, and they're not good for you. And so you're right. That's not to say that you shouldn't be drinking water while you're drinking alcohol. There's so many benefits to doing that.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Don't stop drinking water.
No, it's still very important. Your liver and your kidneys are working in overdrive to help detoxify. So having a higher blood volume is very important and very helpful and supports those organs. And it also helps you pace yourself. And generally speaking, hydration is a good thing. So if any kind of habit stacking you can do to get more water is for all those reasons together. Part of a healthy, responsible drinking behavior is definitely drinking plenty of non-alcoholic fluids. And so that's important. Also don't drink on an empty stomach. Also, alcohol disrupts the quality of your sleep. So stop drinking earlier in the night. and make sure like ideally your blood alcohol is at 0 when your head hits the pillow so that you can get good quality sleep at night. So these are all responsible drinking behaviors that you should be doing regardless. And then, as I say, our product is meant to be another tool in the toolbox. So ideally, you also layer in ZBiotics, and that'll help you deal with the gut-derived acetaldehyde and all the havoc that wreaks throughout your body. And then all together, you put all those things together, and you probably will never experience another miserable day. Not all of them are not always possible, right? Like sometimes you can't. It's a special occasion, and so you're maybe not going to be as judicious as you would be on another night. But generally speaking, if you did those things, you would feel better.
Right. So for everyone listening out there, this is not the carte blanche to go out and just get blitzed out of your mind.
Exactly. This is not a get out of jail free card. This is part of a healthy behavior. Yeah.
So Zack, I'm holding this up again. Where can people find these awesome ZBiotic products? Where would you recommend?
Yeah. Right now, best place to find it is our website, zbiotics.com. If you want to try it, like I say, we do have 100% money back guarantee. So all you have to lose is a miserable next day. It's like a old slogan. So give it a try. I'm confident you'll have it. And as part of being on the podcast, I wanted to make sure that your listeners would have try it a little bit of a deal. So I made a discount, Living Well 15, which will give you 15% off your first order.
Thank you for that. So everybody go out and try it for that special night when you're out drinking. Give it a shot. Let us know what you think.
Yeah. And just to clarify, you only need one per day, basically. Yeah. It kind of lasts for 18 hours, if you will. So
right. Yeah. We didn't talk about how to use it, right?
With every drink or anything.
No, exactly. So basically it's a live, that's the great thing about it, right? It's a live bacteria performing a function over and over again, right? So it's not just it doesn't wear out as long as the bacteria are alive and in your gut, and the bacteria pass through your gut for most people in about 18 to 24 hours. So during that whole period of time, the bacteria is working on your behalf. And so you drink this before you drink, so that it's in there and able to deal with the acetaldehyde as it forms. And then, you just drink one, and then it should cover you for a whole day, whether you're having sort of like lunchtime mimosas or, evening drinks, whatever it will be. As long as you take this before you start drinking, you're good. And if you take it after you start drinking, it'll help for everything after you take the product, right? So if you have a drink and then you drink ZBiotics and then you have 2 more, it'll help for the 2 more you have after, but not the one you had before very much. So that's the deal. And then you wake up the next day and hopefully you make those healthy, habits and routines that you were planning to do.
And it does not need to be refrigerated.
I like my smoothie. And it does not need refrigerated. Exactly. So this bacteria we use, Bacillus subtilis, is, as I say, this environmental microbe lives out in the dirt, and it has incredible properties that I won't nerd out on, but it's my favorite thing. But great bacteria, very stable. They pulled it out of like rocks and things from millions of years ago, and the bacteria are still alive, and so they can persist almost indefinitely at room temperature and pass through your stomach acid unharmed. And then they get into your gut, and they wake up out of that like resilient state and do their job. So it's a really, really great bacteria.
Well, Zack, this has been so enlightening. We're excited to share this conversation with everyone. And one final question that we love to ask all of our guests is, what does the art of living well mean to you?
Yeah, well, maybe not surprisingly, based on what I'm talking about, it's really about balance, right? Like it's the idea that the art of living well, right, is balancing, the many different kind of competing things you have in your life to maximize kind of like your happiness and your wellness. And so in excess, or not sacrificing one thing for another, ideally. So if you're going out and drinking, not turning that down because you have a morning workout, but making sure that you drink responsibly so that you can still make that workout. And so living the best of all worlds and making sure that you have, perfection is nice, but it's impossible, right? Like we know that alcohol isn't good for us, but we also know that in many ways, socially and psychologically, it can be if used responsibly. And so recognizing that and allowing yourself to kind of have those things that make you happy, but doing them in moderation and appropriately adjusting for them so that you can also do all the things are really good, like have your morning smoothie or make that intense yoga class.
Very well said. And I think balance is key, right? We want to live our lives and enjoy, but we want to do it responsibly and stick with our
and get the most of it.
Yeah. And stick with the healthy programs that we are all trying to follow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Zack, for coming on. And we maybe have to have you come on again when you introduce your future products. We'll be anxiously awaiting what those are, because I do think this is such cutting edge technology. And I love just how you're trying to add tools to people's already healthy toolboxes. And looking forward to hearing more.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun. And I'd love to come back. It was really, really a blast.
Awesome. Have a great one.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.